The morning started earlier than usual for the young man. He'd barely slept the night before, not because he wasn't tired, but because his mind kept replaying every detail of the job interview he had been waiting for. It was the kind of opportunity. People dreamed about steady salary, benefits, and a real chance to help his family breathe a little easier. Even though he tried to calm himself, the excitement and fear mixed together kept him awake until he finally drifted off just before dawn. When the sun peeked through the thin curtains of his small room, he forced himself up. His grandmother was already in the kitchen, moving quietly as she prepared tea. She smiled at him when he walked in, her eyes full of warmth and pride. She told him she had been praying for him. He didn't say much in return, but he felt her prayers settle in his chest like a comforting weight. It made him believe for a moment that everything would go well. He dressed carefully, smoothing the wrinkles out of his shirt and adjusting the collar several times. It wasn't new and it wasn't perfect, but it was clean and neat. He checked himself in the mirror, took a slow breath, and whispered that he would give today everything he had. Not many chances came his way, and he couldn't afford to waste this one as he stepped outside. The morning air felt crisp, almost sharp, but refreshing. The streets were already alive with people hurrying to buses, opening shops, or carrying breakfast bags to work. He walked briskly toward the station where he had parked his old car the previous night. He had saved every bit he could to keep that car running. It wasn't pretty, and it made strange noises at times, but it carried him where he needed to be. He sat behind the wheel and closed his eyes for a moment. Today could change everything. The job he was interviewing for wasn't just any position. It was with one of the biggest companies in the city. He'd done all the research he could, rehearsed answers to questions he imagined they might ask, and prepared a folder with his documents. All that was left was to show up on time and do his best. He started the engine, and the car coughed a little before settling into a rough hum. He pulled onto the road, trying to keep his nerves steady. The interview time was strict, and he had planned his route carefully. If traffic stayed normal, he would arrive 15 minutes early. He liked being early. It made him feel in control, even when life rarely gave him that luxury. As he drove, he kept glancing at the dashboard clock. Every minute felt important. He told himself over and over that he just needed to stay calm and focused. The buildings passed on either side, familiar yet blurred because his mind was racing ahead to what would happen when he stepped through the company doors. A few blocks down the road, he noticed something odd ahead. Cars were slowing down even though there was no traffic light. He frowned, leaning forward slightly, wondering what was causing the delay. When he got closer, he saw an old car pulled over on the side of the road with a flat tire. Next to it stood an elderly man leaning slightly on the hood, looking confused and helpless. Cars passed him without stopping. Some drivers glanced his way, others didn't bother. The young man looked at the old man, then at the clock on his dashboard. He felt his stomach twist. He didn't have extra time, not even a few minutes. If he stopped even briefly, he risked being late. He drove a few more feet before his conscience pulled hard on him. His grandmother always said that a person's character showed in the choices they made when nobody was watching. He pressed his lips together, slowed down, and steered over to the side of the road. He told himself he would help quickly and still try to make it on time. But deep down, he knew he was already cutting it close. He parked behind the older man's car and stepped out. The old man looked up, surprised, as if he hadn't expected anyone to stop. His hands were trembling slightly, and he kept looking at the tire as though it might magically fix itself if he stared long enough. The young man greeted him politely and asked if he needed help. The relief on the man's face was instant and genuine. The older man explained that he had tried calling for assistance, but nobody had answered. His phone battery was dying, and he had no strength to change the tire himself. The young man didn't waste time. He opened the trunk, took out the jack, and got to work. The pavement was rough, and his shirt started to gather dust, but he didn't care. He focused on removing the bolts and replacing the tire as quickly as he could, hoping the minutes weren't slipping away too fast. The old man kept thanking him, apologizing for taking his time, and worrying that he might make him late for something important. The young man forced a small smile and said it was fine, that helping was the right thing to do. Inside, though, he could feel the pressure building. Every second he spent tightening bolts felt heavier than the last. But he couldn't rush too much, because he didn't want to risk the tire coming off later and causing an accident. Once the new tire was in place, he lowered the car and checked the spare to make sure it was secure. He wiped his hands on his trousers and stood up. The older man reached into his pocket as if searching for money to give him. But the young man lifted his hand and told him it wasn't necessary. He didn't help for a reward. He helped because someone needed him. The old man stared at him for a moment, almost as though trying to understand what kind of person would walk away without asking for anything. Then he placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and thanked him again, this time more softly, as if deeply moved. The young man nodded and hurried back to his car. He got inside and checked the time. His heart dropped. He was late, very late. He tried not to panic, turned the car back on and pulled into traffic, hoping maybe, just maybe, the company would allow him to explain. He drove faster than usual, though he remained careful not to break any rules. His hands tightened around the steering wheel as he tried to focus on the road. Instead of the growing sense of dread, the city seemed determined to slow him down. A bus stopped unexpectedly. A pedestrian crossed lazily at a point where there was no crossing. A delivery van blocked one lane, forcing drivers to merge slowly. The young man felt the frustration rising, but he forced himself to breathe. Losing his temper wouldn't help. He needed to keep his mind clear. When he finally reached the company building, he parked in the visitor lot and rushed out. The building looked even larger and more impressive in person. People dressed in suits moved confidently in and out of the glass doors. He wiped sweat from his forehead, straightened his shirt as best as he could, and walked inside. The reception area felt big and polished, with bright lights reflecting on shiny floors. The receptionist looked up as he approached, offering a professional smile. He told her he was there for an interview and mentioned the department. She typed quickly on her computer, then paused. Her expression softened slightly, a sign he recognized all too well the expression of someone about to deliver bad news. She told him the interviews were already finished. The hiring manager had left 15 minutes earlier. He felt the breath leave his chest, tried to explain what had happened on the road, hoping she might call someone or give him another option. But she simply shook her head politely and said the team had a strict schedule and couldn't wait. He stood there for a moment, trying to absorb the weight of her words. Everything he had prepared for, everything he had hoped for it, felt like it was slipping away because he stopped to help a stranger. His stomach tightened, and he forced a small, grateful smile at the receptionist, thanking her anyway. It wasn't her fault. It wasn't anyone's fault. It was just life, unpredictable and sometimes unfair. He walked back out of the building slowly. The air felt different now, heavier. He sat inside his car and placed his hands on the steering wheel, staring through the windshield without seeing much. The disappointment felt sharp, but underneath it was something else, a quiet certainty that he had done the right thing, even if it cost him. After a few minutes, he started the car and drove away, not sure what he would tell his family. He imagined their faces worried at first, then proud when he shared the news of the job, only now he had no good news to bring. He felt the pressure settle on his shoulders again, the feeling he knew too well. The feeling of trying to stay strong when everything seemed to push against him. But despite the weight, he didn't regret stopping. Deep down, he believed that helping someone in need mattered. Even if the world didn't always reward kindness, it was still the right path. As he drove toward home, he reminded himself quietly that his story wasn't over yet, even if this chapter felt painful. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, didn't know that the man he helped wasn't just an elderly stranger on the side of the road. For now, all he knew was that life had a strange way of testing people at the most unexpected times. And as he continued driving, unaware of what waited for him in the coming days, the only thing he held on to was hope, the kind that stubbornly stayed alive even when the world told him to let it go. The next morning came slower than usual for the young man. Even before he opened his eyes, the weight of the previous day rested on him like a heavy blanket. He didn't need to remind himself of what had happened. Missing the interview felt as fresh as a bruise. He lay still for a few seconds, listening to the quiet of the house, hoping the feeling would fade. It didn't. He finally sat up, rubbing his face with both hands, trying to push away the tiredness that clung to him. His grandmother was already awake, as she always was. He could hear the soft clatter of dishes in the kitchen and the sound of water boiling. Her steps were slow but steady, full of the same gentle rhythm that had filled his childhood. When he walked in, she glanced toward him with a worried look. She didn't need him to explain anything. She read emotions the way others read newspapers. She poured him a cup of tea and sat across from him, her hands folded on the table. He took a sip before speaking. He told her what had happened on the road, how he helped the old man with the flat tire, and how he arrived too late. He tried to keep his voice calm, but disappointment leaked through anyway. His grandmother listened quietly, without interrupting, nodding slowly now and then. When he finished, she reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her touch was warm and steady, grounding him in a way nothing else could. She told him that sometimes life tested people through their choices, and even though the outcome wasn't what he hoped for, he had chosen kindness. She reminded him that character mattered more than any job interview, and that good seeds planted today had a way of growing in their own time. Her words comforted him, but the heaviness didn't lift immediately. He wished things worked out the way they did in movies, where one good deed instantly led to a miracle. Real life wasn't like that. Real life required patience, a lot of it. He stayed quiet for a while, stirring the tea slowly until the steam faded. Later that morning, he stepped outside to get some fresh air. The neighborhood was awake now. Children walking to school with backpacks too big for them, few shop owners sweeping the front of their stores, and neighbors greeting each other across yards. Life continued as if nothing had changed. Even though he felt stuck in place, he took a slow walk around the block, thinking about his next step. He knew he couldn't sit around waiting for something to fall from the sky. Maybe he needed to look for other opportunities. The city had plenty of places that hired, even if the pay wasn't great. He told himself he would search again in line, in person, anywhere he could. He couldn't give up because of one setback. When he returned home, he grabbed his old laptop and opened job listings. Some posts seemed promising at first, but once he looked closer, the positions paid too little or required experience he didn't have. Still, he kept scrolling, refusing to let frustration win. Hours passed without him realizing it. His grandmother came by with food at one point and urged him to eat, reminding him that strength came from taking care of himself. By the afternoon, he was exhausted. He closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. His thoughts drifted back to the old man he had helped. He wondered how the man was doing, if the spare tire held up, if he managed to reach wherever he was going. He also wondered why the man had been out driving alone in that condition. The man's hands had shaken slightly, and he seemed unsteady on his feet. But maybe he just had a long day or hadn't expected car trouble. As he sat there, lost in thought, suddenly heard his phone vibrating across the bed. He reached for it without much interest, expecting it to be a message from a friend or a random spam call. But the screen showed an unknown number. He hesitated for a second before answering. A calm voice greeted him, asking if he was available to come to the same company he had interviewed for. The caller introduced themselves as an assistant working in the main office. At first, he thought it was a mistake. He told the caller that he had already missed his interview. The assistant replied that they knew, but someone from the leadership team wanted to meet with him privately. His heart skipped. He wondered if this was some kind of mix-up. Why would anyone from the leadership team want to see him after he had already missed the interview? He asked politely if the caller was sure. The assistant confirmed it again, sounding completely certain, and gave him a time for the following day. They told him to come straight to the executive floor and ask for them at the front desk. After the call ended, he sat there in silence, staring at the phone as if it might explain itself. His grandmother walked in just then, carrying folded laundry. When she saw the look on his face, she asked what was wrong. He told her about the call, unsure whether he should feel hopeful or cautious. She smiled a soft, knowing smile, and told him that blessings often came quietly, without warning. He didn't sleep much that night either, but for a different reason. Instead of disappointment, it was uncertainty keeping him awake. He kept wondering what the meeting was about. Maybe they wanted to give him another chance. Or maybe they just wanted to confirm something about the incident on the road. He tried not to let his imagination run too far, but it was impossible not to think about all the possibilities. When morning came, he got ready more carefully than he ever had. He ironed his shirt twice, polished his shoes even though they were old, and checked his documents several times. His grandmother blessed him before he left, placing her hand on his head the way she used to when he was younger. He felt calmer after that. On his way to the company building, memories of the previous day flooded him: the traffic, the road, the old man standing helplessly beside his car. He didn't know why the company wanted to see him now, but he hoped it wasn't something negative. He tried to stay collected as he parked and took the long walk toward the glass entrance. Stepping inside felt different this time. Yesterday he had rushed in, sweating and anxious, praying he wasn't too late. Today he walked more deliberately, still nervous but steady. The receptionist from the day before recognized him and greeted him with a small smile. He told her he had been called in for a meeting on the executive floor. She checked the schedule, nodded, directed him to the elevator at the far end of the lobby. He had never been on the executive floor before. As the elevator rose, he felt his heart beat faster. When the doors opened, the surroundings immediately told him he had entered a different world. The floor was quiet, the halls lined with artwork, and everything from the chairs to the lighting looked expensive. A second receptionist welcomed him and asked him to wait. He sat down slowly, trying not to look too nervous. He held his documents tightly in his hands, though he wasn't even sure if he needed them. He kept replaying the assistant's voice in his mind, trying to find any hidden meaning in the call, but there was none. A few minutes later, the assistant appeared. They greeted him warmly and asked him to follow. He rose from his seat and walked behind them through a long hallway. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because he was tired, because he had no idea what awaited him at the end. The assistant stopped in front of a large door made of wood with a polished shine. They told him to wait for a moment, then knocked gently and stepped inside. He waited in the hallway, taking slow breaths, wondering who he was about to meet. After a moment, the assistant returned and told him he could go in. He stepped through the door, unsure of what he would see, and then stopped abruptly. Sitting in the room behind a wide desk was the same elderly man he had helped on the side of the road. The old man wasn't wearing the plain clothes from yesterday. Instead, he was dressed in a sharp suit that looked tailored and expensive. He sat with confidence, yet his expression softened immediately when he saw the young man walk in. For a second, the young man couldn't speak. His mind struggled to process how the man from the road could be sitting in an office like this, in the top floor of one of the biggest companies in the city. The elderly man stood up slowly and smiled. Not the tired smile from before, but one full of warmth and recognition. He gestured toward the chair in front of the desk and invited the young man to sit. Still confused, the young man walked forward and sat down. His hands felt cold, and his heart pounded as he waited for the man to speak. The elderly man began by thanking him again for helping him the previous day. He said he had been deeply moved by the young man's kindness and humility. He explained that many people had passed him without stopping, even though he clearly needed help. But the young man had chosen to pull over, even when he was in a hurry. Then, in a calm voice, the elderly man revealed what the young man had never expected to hear. He was the CEO of the company. The young man stared at him, stunned. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. A mixture of disbelief, embarrassment, and shock washed over him. He struggled to form words. The elderly man simply smiled. Understanding his confusion, he told the young man that he had been on his way. Back from a meeting the previous day when his car tire burst, he had tried calling for help, but his phone wasn't receiving signal. He had been worried because he had an important appointment later, and his age made changing the tire difficult. The CEO leaned forward slightly, said that the moment the young man refused money, he knew he was dealing with someone genuine, someone whose character stood strong even in difficult situations. The young man listened quietly, still trying to make sense of it all. The CEO told him that the qualities he displayed, kindness, patience, honesty, were the qualities he valued most in people who worked for his company. The young man felt a wave of emotion build inside him. He thought about his grandmother, about the disappointment of missing the interview, about all the hours he had spent preparing. Now, sitting across from the CEO himself, everything felt unreal. The CEO wasn't finished speaking. He said he had asked his assistant to contact the young man because he didn't want a person with such integrity to slip away unnoticed. He believed that people like him made companies stronger, not because of their resumes, but because of their heart. The young man sat there quietly, absorbing the words that felt almost too good to be true. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but something inside him told him his life was about to shift in a way he never expected. The young man sat in the chair, still trying to understand everything happening around him. The office was quiet, except for the steady hum of the air conditioning. The CEO's words hung in the air, settling slowly in his mind. He had helped a man on the road simply because it was the right thing to do. He had not expected anything in return. Now he was sitting face to face with the head of one of the biggest companies in the city. For a moment, he didn't know what to say. His hands rested on his lap, tightening and loosening without him noticing. The CEO watched him with a gentle smile, as if he understood the storm of emotions running through him. The CEO leaned back in his chair and said he wanted to know more about him, his background, his family, his goals, and what he hoped for in life. The young man hesitated for a second, then slowly began to speak. He talked about how he grew up, how his grandmother raised him, how money had always been tight, but love was never missing in their home. He explained how he had been trying to find stable work so he could help with bills and save for a better future. He didn't try to sound impressive. He didn't use fancy words. He just told the truth, the same way he would speak to someone he trusted. The CEO listened carefully, nodding now and then, never interrupting. There was something kind in his eyes, something that made the young man feel safe enough to speak openly. When he finished, the CEO took a slow breath and said he admired the way he carried himself. He appreciated the honesty, the humility, and the strength hidden behind his quiet voice. He said many people came into the company with strong resumes, but weak character. But this young man had shown integrity before even stepping inside the building. The young man didn't know how to respond. He lowered his eyes for a moment, feeling a mix of gratitude and disbelief. No one outside his family had ever spoken to him like this. No one had ever looked at him and seen his potential instead of limitations. The CEO reached for a folder on his desk and slid it closer. He explained that there were several positions open in the company's some entry level, some more advanced, and he believed the young man could handle the responsibilities that came with them. The young man listened quietly, unsure if he was dreaming or awake. It felt like a window had opened somewhere in his life, letting in a light he hadn't seen in a long time. But before the CEO discussed details, he asked him a simple question. "Why did you stop to help me yesterday?" The young man looked up, surprised the CEO needed an explanation at all. He thought for a moment and gave the most honest answer he could find. He said he saw someone in trouble, someone who needed help, and he couldn't just drive past. He said he imagined how he would feel if his grandmother were stranded on the road alone. He wouldn't want people to leave her there. So he did what he hoped others would do for someone they cared about. The CEO smiled at these words. He said that the world needed more people who still believed in kindness, even when kindness slowed them down or cost them something. He explained that positions in his company required more than skill. They required heart, and heart was something the young man clearly had. The room felt warm despite the cool air. The young man's heartbeat softened as the nervousness slowly faded. He began to relax just a little, allowing himself to absorb the moment. Still, he knew life didn't give second chances easily, and he didn't want to assume anything too soon. The CEO stood up and walked toward the window. The view stretched across the entire city, cars moving like small dots, buildings standing tall, clouds drifting slowly across the sky. The young man glanced at him, wondering what he was thinking. After a long moment, the CEO spoke again. He said he remembered being young and struggling to find opportunities. He told a short story about how people had overlooked him when he first started out. He said that because of those memories, he always tried to lift people up when he saw something genuine in them. The young man listened closely. It was strange hearing the CEO, someone powerful and respected, talk openly about a difficult past. It reminded him that everyone started somewhere, and even the most successful people had walked through hard times. The CEO turned back to him and said he wanted to offer him something more than just a job. He wanted to offer him a chance to grow, a chance to build something lasting, a chance to prove himself. The young man blinked, unsure if he had heard correctly. He asked carefully what that meant. The CEO explained that he could start in a department where he could learn real skills: administration, communication, coordination, or even training to move into management someday. He said the company offered classes and mentorship for employees willing to learn. The young man's chest tightened with emotion. Opportunities like this didn't come often, especially to people like him. He had always dreamed of building a stable future, but he had never imagined anything like this. He remembered the rejection emails he had received from dozens of companies. He remembered walking into interviews only to be dismissed within minutes. And now he was being offered a chance, not because he had the best resume, but because someone saw value in who he was as a person. The CEO stepped closer and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. He told him that kindness wasn't weakness, and doing good wasn't something to hide. He said the world had enough people chasing success without caring who they stepped on along the way. What the world needed were people who understood compassion, people who remembered where they came from. The young man nodded slowly, feeling his eyes sting slightly. He blinked, trying to keep his emotions under control. He didn't want to appear overwhelmed, but inside, he felt like he was standing at the doorway of a future he had never dared to picture. The CEO then sat back down and motioned for him to relax. He asked him if he had any questions about the company, the job roles, or the future. The young man took a moment to gather his thoughts, then asked about the working hours, the training process, and what would be expected of him. He didn't want to disappoint anyone. He wanted to be prepared. The CEO answered every question patiently. He explained the details, the requirements, the support system the company provided. He made sure the young man understood that he wouldn't be thrown into difficult tasks without guidance. Everything would happen step by step. As the conversation continued, the young man felt more comfortable. He began to ask questions more freely, showing curiosity and interest. He talked about his eagerness to learn and how he wanted to grow into someone his grandmother could be proud of. The CEO smiled each time he mentioned her. He said he admired how deeply he cared about his family. After nearly an hour of talking, the CEO finally asked him how he felt about starting immediately. The young man froze. He had expected a follow-up meeting or a test period, not an offer on the spot. He asked if the CEO was sure, his voice almost a whisper. The CEO nodded firmly and said he believed in trusting his instincts. And his instincts told him that the young man would be a great addition to the company. The young man swallowed hard, realizing this moment might be the turning point of his life. He took a deep breath and said he would be honored to accept. His voice trembled slightly, but the words were sincere. The CEO stood again and reached out his hand. The young man rose from his seat and shook it firmly. It was a handshake that carried more meaning than either of them said out loud. It was a handshake that symbolized trust, opportunity, and a new beginning. The CEO then called his assistant into the room and asked them to guide the young man through the rest of the process documents, orientation details, and the steps he needed to take next. The assistant greeted him warmly and congratulated him. It felt surreal. Only yesterday, he had stood outside the building with disappointment weighing him down. Now he was walking through the executive floor being welcomed, like a new member of a team. As the assistant walked him down the hallway, I found himself glancing back at the CEO's office door. He still half expected someone to stop him and say a mistake had been made. But no one did. Everything felt real, solid, and life-changing. They eventually reached a smaller room where paperwork was waiting. The assistant explained each form, making sure he understood what he was signing. He tried his best to stay calm, but inside his heart beat with excitement. Every signature felt like a promise to himself, to his grandmother, and to the future he could now imagine. When everything was finished, the assistant told him he would begin the following week. They said he would receive an email with instructions, schedules, and contacts for his training team. They also told him the CEO had personally noted that he wanted to check on the young man's progress from time to time. Hearing that made him smile. He couldn't believe someone so important would take an interest in him. It gave him a sense of responsibility, one he was ready to carry as he walked out of the building and stepped into the sunlight. The world felt different. The sky seemed brighter, the air fresher. He stood still for a moment, looking up, feeling the warmth of the sun on his face. Everything inside him felt lighter. As if the disappointment from the day before had melted away, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. His first instinct was to call his grandmother. She answered on the first ring, worry in her voice, as she asked how the meeting went. He took a breath and told her everything: the CEO, the offer, the job, the support. She didn't speak at first. Then he heard her sniff softly, overwhelmed with joy. She told him she always knew his kindness would lead him somewhere good. She said she had prayed for him the night before, asking for a sign that life hadn't forgotten him. He promised he would work hard and make her proud. She replied that he already had. As he hung up the phone, he glanced back at the tall building behind him. It looked different now, intimidating but welcoming, a symbol of a new chapter. He walked toward his car feeling taller, stronger, and more hopeful than he had felt in a long time. He didn't know exactly what the future held, but for the first time, he believed it could be something good, something he could build with his own hands. And as he drove home, he kept thinking about the moment on the road, the moment he chose to help a stranger instead of rushing to his interview. That small choice, made out of compassion, had changed everything. The young man stepped into the building with a mixture of confusion and hope swirling in his chest. He wasn't sure what he was walking into. All he knew was that someone from the company had called him early that morning, asking if he could come in for a private meeting. They didn't explain anything else. They didn't ask him to bring papers, didn't mention a new interview, nothing. Just a simple request to come in. He had stared at his grandmother when he told her. She had smiled the same soft smile she always gave him when something unexpected happened. She told him not to worry, that sometimes life opened doors quietly, without noise or warning. He held on to those words now as he moved through the quiet lobby. A woman at the front desk greeted him kindly and asked him to wait. He sat in a wide chair that was so soft, he felt himself sink into it. His hands rested on his knees, fingers tapping lightly from nervous energy. Everything around him felt too big and too polished, smooth floors that shined like glass, tall windows that stretched almost to the ceiling. People walking past in clothes that looked expensive even from far away. He felt out of place, like he had stepped into a world that wasn't his. A few minutes passed before a man in a suit approached him. The man's expression was gentle, almost warm. He introduced himself as an assistant and told the young man to follow him. They walked down a long hallway lined with framed pictures of past achievements, awards, and smiling employees. Each picture seemed to tell the story of a successful company, one that grew through hard work and loyalty. They reached a large wooden door, and the assistant opened it, motioning him inside. The young man entered slowly, unsure of what to expect. The room was wide and bright, with tall windows letting sunlight spill across a long table. At the end of the table sat a man he had only seen once before, the elderly man from the side of the road. Only now he wasn't in an old jacket or standing beside a car with a flat tire. He was dressed in a sharp suit, neat tie, polished shoes. He looked completely different, yet exactly the same. His eyes were still warm, still gentle, still carrying the same kindness he had shown the day before. For a second, the young man didn't know if he should smile, speak, or turn around and walk out. The old man saved him from deciding. He stood up from his chair and approached him with a slow, steady step. "I'm glad you came," he said, his voice calm and friendly. "Please sit." The young man nodded and took a seat. His heart beat fast, like it was trying to escape his chest. The old man sat across from him, hands folded neatly on the table. "I didn't expect to see you here," the young man began. "I didn't even know that I was the CEO." The old man said with a small smile. "I'm not surprised." The young man swallowed and nodded slightly. "Yes, sir." "You don't have to call me sir," the old man said. "Just speak to me the way you did yesterday, honestly, simply." The young man nodded again, though he wasn't sure if he could relax that easily. Being in the same room with the head of the company felt unreal. Yesterday, he had been helping him change a tire on the road, thinking he was just an ordinary driver. The old man leaned back in his chair. "I want to talk to you about something important. Yesterday, you stopped to help me without asking who I was. You didn't know my name. You didn't know my position. You didn't know if I could do anything for you. You helped because it was the right thing to do." The young man listened quietly. The old man's words were steady and sincere. "You should know something," the old man continued. "Most people drove past me. They didn't slow down, didn't ask if I was okay. A few people looked at me but kept going. Then you came along, and you didn't hesitate." "I just saw someone who needed help," the young man replied softly. "I would hope someone would stop for me too. That's the kind of heart people can't fake," the old man said. "You didn't just change my tire. You showed me patience, respect, kindness. You refused money even though you clearly could have used it. I saw all of that." The young man felt heat rise behind his eyes, not from sadness but from being seen. Really seen for the first time in a long while. He didn't speak. He didn't know what to say. "I'm sorry that you missed your interview because of it," the old man went on. "I know you were counting on that chance." "It's okay," the young man whispered. "It just wasn't meant to be." The old man shook his head slowly. "Maybe it was, just not in the way you expected." The young man lifted his eyes, confused. The old man watched him with a calm, steady gaze before speaking again. "I've been in business for many years," he said, "and I've learned something. Skills can be taught. Experience can be gained. But true character comes from within. And it's rare." Paused, letting the words settle. "That's why I asked you to come today," the old man said gently. "I wanted to offer you something." Young man shifted in his chair, sure of where the conversation was going. "I want to offer you a position at this company," the old man said clearly. "Not the one you originally applied for. I want you in a place where your natural qualities, your heart, your patience, your honesty can shine. A position that allows you to grow." The young man stared at him, shocked. His hands went still on his lap. For a moment, he wondered if he had heard correctly. "A position," he repeated. "Yes," the old man said simply. "A job. A chance. A beginning." The young man's voice caught in his throat. "Why? Why me?" The old man smiled kindly. "Because yesterday, when you thought no one important was watching, you showed the kind of person you are. And I think this company needs people like you." The room grew silent. The sunlight from the window made soft patterns on the table. The young man let out a slow breath he didn't know he'd been holding. His chest felt tight, not from fear, but from something overwhelming and warm. "I don't know what to say," he finally managed. "Say yes," the old man replied gently. "The rest we can figure out together." The young man looked down at his hands. They were trembling slightly. Everything felt unreal, like he had stepped into a moment he never thought possible. The old man didn't pressure him. He waited quietly, giving him space to breathe. After a long moment, the young man lifted his head. His eyes were clearer, his voice steadier. I would be honored." The old man nodded, pleased. "Good, then let's get started." But he wasn't finished yet. "There's something else," he added. "I want you to know that your job here won't just be about work. I want you to grow. I want you to learn. I want you to feel like you belong. Because people with your heart don't just work, they inspire." The young man felt his throat tighten again, but he held himself steady. He wasn't used to anyone believing in him this way. It felt new, strange, but also deeply comforting. The old man stood, and the young man slowly rose with him. They shook hands, firm, warm, steady. The handshake didn't feel like a business deal. It felt like the beginning of something good, something hopeful, something he had waited for without even knowing it. As he left the room, the young man glanced back. The old man gave him a small nod, the kind that said everything would be all right, for the first time in a long while. The young man believed it. He walked down the hallway with a lighter step, the world feeling just a little different. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for sure. Kindness led him here, and kindness was going to lead him forward. The young man walked out of the office with a feeling he could hardly describe. It was almost too much to hold at once: relief, joy, disbelief, hope. All of it mixed inside him, rising and falling like waves. He had never been offered anything like this in his life. A job, chance, a beginning that felt brighter than anything he had imagined. It felt unreal, yet his feet carried him down the hallway as if they knew exactly where he was meant to be. He stepped outside the building and paused for a moment on the sidewalk. Cars passed by, people hurried toward places they needed to be. Sunlight touched the tops of buildings, and everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The world had not changed, but he had. Something inside him felt lifted, as if the weight he had been carrying for so long finally loosened its grip. He reached the bus stop and sat down, letting out a long, steady breath. The air felt cooler than before, and he let it wash over him. His hands rested weakly on his knees, like they were still trying to catch up with everything that had happened. He smiled softly, without meaning to. It was the kind of smile that came from deep inside, one that you couldn't hide even if you tried. On the ride home, he kept replaying the meeting in his mind. Old man's words stayed with him. Words about character, about kindness, about how a simple act on a random day could change everything. Couldn't understand how something so small, helping someone with a flat tire, could lead to something so big. But maybe, he thought, maybe that's how life works sometimes. Quiet miracles, like small choices shaping big futures. When he reached home, he stood outside the door for a few seconds before walking in. He wanted to savor the moment, feel the air of possibility before stepping inside to share it. Finally, he opened the door, and his grandmother looked up from her chair. She didn't say anything at first. She simply studied his face, the way she always did when she wanted to read him without asking questions. Went to keep his expression calm, but it didn't work. The smile returned before he could stop it. "So," she asked softly, her eyes narrowing a little. "How did it go?" He took a slow breath. "Better than I ever imagined." Her eyebrows rose. "Matter how?" He sat beside her, leaning in slightly, as if telling a secret. "They offered me a job." She covered her mouth with her hand and leaned back in her chair. For a moment her eyes closed, and she let out a long breath, one filled with relief and pride. When she opened her eyes again, they were softer, warmer. "I knew it," she whispered. "I knew something good would come." He nodded slowly. "There's more." She tilted her head more. "The man I helped on the road, he's the CEO." Her eyes widened, and for a moment she didn't move at all. Then she let out a tiny laugh, the kind that sounded like disbelief mixed with wonder. "He's the one who interviewed you today?" she asked. "He's the one who offered me the job?" She shook her head, pressing a hand over her heart. "Look at that. Look at how life works." He felt the same way, surprised, grateful, in awe of the way things had unfolded. They talked for a while about the job, about what the CEO had said, about how surprising life could be. His grandmother listened with the kind of quiet attention she had always given him, nodding gently, smiling every now and then. Later that evening, when the house grew silent and the sun slipped lower in the sky, the young man stepped outside to sit on the small steps leading to the street. The sky glowed with a soft orange light, and he watched it fade into deeper shades. For the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to imagine a future that wasn't filled with fear or uncertainty. He imagined waking up with purpose. He imagined being able to help his grandmother the way she had helped him. He imagined being able to stand on his own, proud of who he was and where he came from. He imagined being someone who could make a difference through kindness, just as kindness had made a difference for him. The next week came faster than he expected. On the day he was supposed to start, he woke early and prepared carefully. He checked his clothes 3 times, brushed his shoes until they shined, and made sure everything was neat and clean. As he walked to the bus stop, he felt a mix of nerves and excitement. Not the heavy nerves he used to feel. These were different. These were the kind that came from knowing you were stepping into something new. When he arrived at the company, the atmosphere felt familiar but less intimidating than before. The woman at the front desk greeted him with a friendly smile and showed him where to go. The young man followed her instructions, taking in the bright hallways, the polished floors, the soft hum of activity around him. Everything seemed alive with energy. He was guided into a new workspace where a small group of employees welcomed him warmly. They introduced themselves, one by one, offering handshakes and smiles. They didn't treat him like a stranger. They didn't look at him like he didn't belong. Something about their kindness made the transition easier. Throughout the day, the young man learned new tasks, simple ones at first, things that could help him understand the company's rhythm. He paid attention closely, asked questions, watched others to make sure he didn't fall behind. His coworkers appreciated his effort and offered help whenever he needed it. During his lunch break, as he sat at a small table near the window, the CEO walked into the room. He wasn't surrounded by assistants or busy on a phone, walked quietly, noticing the young man immediately. "Settling in well?" the CEO asked with a warm smile. "Yes," the young man replied. "Everyone has been very kind." "I'm glad to hear that," the CEO said. "If you ever need anything, guidance, support, or just a listening ear, you can always come to me. I meant what I said. This place is for you to grow." The young man nodded deeply, touched by the sincerity in the CEO's voice. They talked for a short while about the job, about learning at a steady pace, about the importance of asking questions. When the CEO left, the young man felt even more determined to do well. It's not to impress anyone, but to honor the kindness he had been shown. Over the next few months, things began to change slowly and quietly. He started to learn more about his position, and soon he found himself taking on small responsibilities. His coworkers trusted him. His supervisors appreciated his effort. He was never the loudest or the fastest, but he was steady, dependable, and honest qualities the CEO had noticed from the start. One afternoon, the CEO invited him to his office again. It wasn't formal or intimidating. It felt almost like a conversation between two people who respected each other. "You've been doing well," the CEO told him. "Better than well, actually. You've shown dedication, humility, and a desire to learn." The young man looked down for a moment, shy but grateful. "I want to give you more responsibilities," the CEO continued. "Nothing too heavy, but enough to help you grow." The young man nodded. "I'm ready." "I believe you are," the CEO said with a smile. By the time the young man left the office, he felt a new confidence take root inside him. It wasn't loud or bold. It was quiet, steady, just like him. A kind of confidence built not from pride but from gratitude and determination. As months turned into a year, his life changed in ways he never expected. He was able to help his grandmother more. He was able to save money instead of worrying about every little expense. Found himself waking each morning with a purpose that lifted his spirit. Sometimes on his way to work, he would pass a spot where he once stopped to help the old man with the flat tire. Each time, he slowed for a moment, letting the memory wash over him. It reminded him how quickly life could shift, how small choices could open wide doors, how kindness could echo back in ways you could never predict. One evening, after finishing a productive day at work, the CEO invited him for a short walk outside the building. They walked slowly down the sidewalk, the city lights glowing around them. The air was cool, carrying the sounds of distant traffic. "I want to tell you something," the CEO said softly. "When you helped me on the road that day, I had been feeling discouraged. I had spent years building this company, but sometimes I wondered if people were losing their sense of care, losing kindness." The young man listened closely. "But you restored something in me," the CEO continued. "Reminded me that there are still people who help without expecting anything. You reminded me why I started this company to begin with." The young man felt humbled by the words. "I'm grateful for you," the CEO said simply. "And I'm proud of you." The young man nodded slowly. "I'm grateful for you too." They walked a little further before the CEO spoke again. "I hope you never change the way you are. The world needs people like you." The young man didn't say anything right away. Instead, he let the words settle into his heart, warm and steady.